Hey, you're watching HuffPost Live. I'm Marc Lamont Hill. Gawker has inspired a debate over outing and privacy. Last Friday, the website published a post about a media company executive married to a woman with 3 children who allegedly paid for a night with a male escort. When the escort discovered this executive had a famous brother with connections in Washington, he asked for help with a housing dispute. After the executive refused and broke off contact, the escort went to Gawker, which published the story. The post was publicly derided for gay-shaming the exec, who is not a public figure, and eventually Gawker removed the story entirely. So, beyond the basic journalistic questions about whether this was appropriate to publish, what are the ethics of outing? Is there ever an appropriate time to publicly out someone? Joining us now to discuss this is Rich Juzwiak. He is a writer at Gawker with a cool t-shirt. We also have Jay Kirtley, a professor of media ethics and law at the University of Minnesota. And Maria Bustillos joins us, a journalist and critic. Rich, I'm going to start with you. There's been a lot of fallout from this. How are things shaking out? Where are people landing on this right now?
We're just in a total meltdown. People are furious. Editorial is basically furious with our leadership.
I can imagine. And how do they express their fury?
By screaming.
Right.
No matter what, at least we work in a place where we can scream at the guy who's pissing us off.
Well, that's a good thing.
Even in this case, it is a good thing.
And why are they pissed off? Why do they say they're pissed off?
Because something changed, and we weren't privy to what. Before Friday, we were a site that did not take down posts on whims. Right. And on Friday, we became a site that did that.
And why do you consider it a whim as opposed to a principled, critical, thoughtful reflection?
Because I consider it a whim because it seemed to be fueled by backlash as opposed to deeply seated moral beliefs that should have been voiced before the post went up, in my opinion.
No chance the backlash persuaded them.
No, I think that the backlash did persuade.
I don't mean that in the sense of, oh shit, we're in trouble. I mean persuaded them in the sense of, hey, maybe we really made a bad choice.
We've been dealing with backlash forever. We get backlash all the time.
Yeah.
We laugh at backlash a lot of the time.
Occasionally backlash is correct though, right?
I think in this case it was.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just interesting to find out when people choose to respond to backlash in that way.
In my opinion, this story became a real story when the post was taken down. Up until then, it was, you could deride it as typical Gawker sleaze if you wanted to,
yeah.
Right? And yes, it was an extreme example of that, sure. It was one of my personal least favorite stories that's gone up on the site since I've been working there, possibly ever. That said, once the post went down, all this scrutiny went on it, and then the story became not the story anymore. The story became the story about the story.
Right. The thing about the thing it sort of became. And you wrote a piece for Gawker, and you wrote that Gawker should have published the story just with a different spin. You said, the story, in my view, wasn't anti-gay, but it was inhumane. Assuming Geithner isn't out as a man who sleeps with men, to most who know him, as his response in the original piece did suggest, his coming out process has been taken out of his hands. It wasn't until I was 22 that I so much as kissed another guy. Becoming comfortable with yourself to live openly can take decades. If it were up to me, I would have preserved Geithner's right to slow pace self-acceptance. So in that case, that sounds like, from reading that, then you don't agree with outing at all.
I agree with outing in certain cases, yes.
But if everyone has a process, before we go there, how would you have written the story?
I would have written, if I hadn't gotten to the point where I immediately found this morally reprehensible, what the escort porn performer was doing. Certainly by the time I looked him up, got to his utterly insane Facebook page, saw a homophobic post on it. See, I'm so sensitive about homophobia that's all it would have taken me to flip. And I understand that I'm saying this with the advantage of hindsight, and I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. I'm just saying, personally speaking, you do something homophobic, I hate you. And it's war.
Yeah.
So at that point, I would have said, we're working with the wrong guy. We're protecting the wrong guy. The story actually here is, look at this insane porn star who's trying to extort this guy that I'm not going to name. Or if that felt like an ethical violation because I had promised my source so much at that point that I'd be turning my back on him, make it double blind. Gets half the traffic, none of this.
None of this, but that kind of almost...
Exactly, yeah, I know.
Maria, what do you say to this? Because I get the sense from hearing you speak that you believe that some of this gossip, some of these gossip sites, some of this stuff, there's value in it.
Well, I think Rich and I would agree about that a lot of the stories that Gawker publishes are really valuable for the public. And I just wanted to jump in on one little thing. There was no extortion that I know of. I mean, I think it's really important. That thing was repeated wrongly. You know, the porn star made his pitch and the executive cut him off right there. There was never any question or any evidence. So, I mean, I think that alters the thing a little bit. I mean, you know, we can disagree about whether or not it was a good idea to publish that story. And I think most people kind of think it wasn't a good idea to publish it. But I think it's more important, the value that Gawker has elsewhere, kind of, it's worth it to the public to have these stories reported out that everyone else is too afraid of.
Right. Yeah, I see value in some of these stories. You know, again, I think we all agree that this one might not have been the one to hang your hat on. Max Reed, the editor-in-chief of Gawker, who is resigning, also on your T-shirt.
Yes.
That's what I wanted to point out.
Yes.
His T-shirt at the opening.
It's so great.
And Tommy.
Yes, this is what solidarity looks like today. Max and Tommy there. But and when he resigned, he said this. He said, given the chance, Gawker will always report on married C-suite executives of major media companies fucking around on their wives. Interesting. Jane, does a C-suite executive constitute a public figure?
For some purposes, perhaps, but I am really bothered by that motto because it really suggests to me that everybody at Gawker has now declared that their personal sex lives are public information as well. It's really hard for me to see the public interest in this story as it was reported. People can be public figures for all purposes. I think Bill Clinton is a really good example of an all-purpose public figure. I can't think of anything you could report about him that would cross the line in terms of an ethical problem with invasion of privacy.
Really?
But I really can't. But
if you found out that if Bill Clinton's medical records revealed that he had HIV.
I would have no problem with having that reported. But it's
Wow.
because he's a public figure. He's got a very powerful foundation. He's got a wife who's running for president. Legitimate story as far as I'm concerned. You know, I'm old enough to remember when Ronald Reagan's colon cancer, people were debating whether that should be reported or not. I have no issue with those kinds of topics in that context. I draw a distinction between that and Arthur Ashe, for example, because at the time Arthur Ashe was discovered to be HIV positive, he was really not a public figure in the same way that he had been when he was winning the Grand Slam at Wimbledon and elsewhere. But be that as it may, you can be a public figure for limited purposes or for any purpose. It strikes me that the CFO of Condé Nast is certainly a public figure insofar as his work as a publishing magnate, handling the finances of Condé Nast. And I would even extend it to say that if, as happened in Spokane, Washington a number of years ago, if you could make the case that he's hiring and firing people based on their willingness to engage in sexual activities with him and so forth, then that would perhaps be a legitimate example. But in this case, I don't see it. I don't see what the public interest is in knowing this.
I would like to jump in and say that my sex life is a matter of public information. I've written at length about it, as have people on the site as well.
Right.
So talking about sex in this way...
But is it public information by virtue of the fact that you've written about it or by virtue of the fact that you work there? I.e., had you not worked there, it would still be equally publicly
or if you had chosen to write about it yourself.
Right. Absolutely. 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 And there is that difference, and that's why I wouldn't have outed this guy.
Right. But just so I understand your point clearly, if you never wrote about your own personal sex life, would it still be public information?
I would feel like if somebody burned me tomorrow, then I kind of set myself up for that, being as public and visible as I am about sex. I feel like
even if you never talked about your own sex life.
By virtue of the fact that we work at Gawker and do what we do, personally, if it happened to a coworker, I'd feel differently. Yeah. Personally, I know what would creep up into my head, which is I kind of deserve this. I kind of.
Wow.
Well, I mean, we're talking about secrets. We're talking about the line. We're talking about
I think all of it is bad. I err on the side, Jade, of not sharing this stuff, and that's what I was going to say. If the principle is to expose cheating, in this case, for example, why did the sexual or gender orientation of the escort matter to the story? If it's all about the ethics of cheating in this case.
Well, I agree with that, and I think, the fact that the focus became on sexual orientation, to me, is a secondary issue. I mean, think back, for those who remember this far back, the Gary Hart scandal back when he was running for president, the fact that he was having extramarital affairs with a female. That was a scandal irrespective of what his sexual orientation would be. Some people see, one's morality, however you define that, as a defining factor in terms of qualification for things like public office. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I will say that if someone is promoting their character as an important qualification for whatever job it is that they're seeking or doing, then I think their character, however we define that, is fair game. And for a lot of people, extramarital affairs, regardless of sexual orientation, are an indication of lack of moral character. And it sounds like, from that quote that we talked about at the top of this, that Gawker thinks that too. So if that's your view, all I'm saying is if you're going to set yourself up for that standard, then you have to expect to be scrutinized under the same standard.
That slope seems so slippery to me, though. Maria, jump on in.
Gawker's standard. I'm not necessarily endorsing it. I'm saying that that's what they say.
No, I agree. And it's consistent within the logic of their framework. I'm just saying I find the framework itself troublesome. But Maria,
I agree with you.
There are legal precedents here that have been tested over and over. When somebody, and in fact, this is how the Cosby deposition was unsealed recently last month. The judge in that case unsealed the deposition for the exact reason that Cosby had made an issue of his personal morality of being like a sort of father figure to the black community and exhorting people to behave in a certain way. Then the judge said, all right, you have made your personal morality a matter of public interest. That's why we're going to release this deposition.
Yeah.
And I mean, in the case of this executive, the broader argument is, and I'm of two minds about this, but the broader argument is that this man is in a position of really high authority. He is highly connected, influential, powerful person. And if people like that are going to be in positions of power and expect the collusion of the press and concealing their secrets, we have a big problem. That is not okay.
I don't see this as collusion with the press as such. I mean, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Gawker gets approached by this male prostitute who's basically trying to feed them a line, a scandalous story. Where is it written in the history of this particular story that this particular individual was engaged in some kind of hypocrisy that had an effect on the public interest? I mean, if he was out there, claiming high moral ground, if he was out there as a homophobic individual, we'd be talking about something else. But I'm not aware that that's in his history. Am I wrong about that?
Well, not so far as we know, but like the old-fashioned view is that a person in the closet, a very powerful person, will use a woman, marry a woman, have children as a facade so that he can pretend and live two lives. So, I'm not saying that this is my view.
I mean, how do you know?
No, you're so right. I'm saying the old-fashioned view is that
of why, and I'm ready to be persuaded. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I've defended the news media in publishing all kinds of stories, but I'm still hard pressed to see what the public interest is based on what we know about this guy. If the issue is purely that he's a chief financial officer at Condé Nast with nothing else to indicate homophobia, taking a puritanical view of sex or whatever, then what's the public interest?
I understand this is not totally something I subscribe to, but there's an argument to be made that the fact that his brother was a cabinet member, in a pretty, had a lot of questionable activities himself as Treasury Secretary, that people, he wasn't popular, and so there's this idea of powerful families who are, in positions to affect others. And if they're going to front in that particular way, I think that there's a case to be made that it should be exposed all the time. I mean, outing is another thing. It's so complicated.
That's a tough argument. Because then you're essentially saying if you're successful at all in life or have any influence in the world, then everything you do is up for grabs.
We have a power structure.
There's a radical way of thinking that says if you're not out here with you're gay brothers, you're doing us a disservice. I mean, that's often the fundamental of outing. Now, in this case, as has been pointed out, we don't know what this guy's sexuality is. We don't know what kind of deal he had with his wife. I don't think he should feel ashamed for wanting to use an escort. Right. But I think the root of outing is the more of us that there exist, the harder it will be to defeat us. And so come join us.
Right.
But
I don't know that was the impetus here.
That's the fundamental question. You know, just as you said that you've chosen to be very upfront in your postings about your own sexual life, that's your choice.